It is invisible, it is tasteless, and it is likely flowing through your veins at this very moment. In 1945, before the post-war boom of consumer plastics, there was a specific chemical signature that did not exist in human blood, because it was alien to our biology. Today, if you were to take a blood sample from a soldier in Singapore, a banker in London, or a newborn baby in rural America, you would almost certainly find it. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this synthetic compound is now present in the bodies of 99% of the American population. It has been found in polar bears in the Arctic and in rainwater in the Amazon. It is a man-made molecule that nature has no mechanism to destroy. For decades, we welcomed it into our homes, cooked our breakfast on it, and wore it to stay dry in the rain. It was marketed as a miracle of modern convenience and a symbol of the better living through chemistry era. But beneath the glossy, non-stick surface lay a darkened history of withheld documents, unexplained illnesses, and a chemical bond so strong that scientists call it a forever chemical. This is not just a story about a frying pan. This is the story of how a single industrial secret contaminated the entire planet. To understand the scale of this contamination, we have to go back to a laboratory accident in New Jersey in 1938. A chemist named Roy Plunkett, working for DuPont, was experimenting with refrigerants and had stored a canister of tetrafluoroethylene gas in dry ice. When he opened the valve, nothing came out, but the canister was still heavy. Curious, Plunkett saw the metal canister open and found a white, waxy powder inside because the gas had polymerized. It was slippery, heat-resistant, and chemically inert, meaning it wouldn't react with almost anything it touched. They called this substance polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE, and the world would eventually know it by the trade name Teflon. By the 1950s and 60s, Teflon was everywhere, used in the Manhattan Project to seal valves holding uranium and coating the frying pans of the happy homemaker. It was a gold mine, but to manufacture this miracle plastic effectively, the industry needed a processing aid, a surfactant to smooth out the lumps during production. They chose a substance called perfluorooctanoic acid, also known as PFOA, or as it was known on the factory floor, C8. This is where the story shifts from innovation to tragedy, because while Teflon itself is a stable polymer, the C8 used to make it is a different beast entirely. It was sourced initially from 3M, then later manufactured by DuPont. And as early as the 1950s, the scientists handling it began to notice that C8 had some very peculiar and potentially dangerous properties. What makes C8 so unique and so dangerous comes down to basic chemistry. At the heart of the PFOA molecule is a chain of 8 carbon atoms, each surrounded by fluorine atoms. The bond between carbon and fluorine is the strongest single bond in organic chemistry, like a handshake that cannot be broken. In nature, everything decays. A fallen leaf rots, iron rusts, and even radioactive isotopes eventually lose their energy. But the carbon-fluorine bond is so stable that it resists heat, light, bacteria, and chemical processes. This stability is what makes Teflon non-stick and waterproof, but it is also what makes PFOA a forever chemical. When it enters the environment, it does not break down, and when it enters the human body, it does not metabolize. It accumulates in a process known as bioaccumulation. If you drink water contaminated with a tiny amount of arsenic, your body processes it and excretes it relatively quickly. But if you ingest C8, it binds to your plasma proteins, lingers in the liver, and builds up over years, layer upon layer, with every glass of water and every exposure. The scientists knew this bond was strong, but what they didn't publicly discuss was what happened when that indestructible molecule began to interact with living cells. The public revelation of this danger didn't come from a government regulator or a scientific journal, but from a cattle farmer in Parkersburg, West Virginia, named Wilbur Tennant. In the late 1990s, Tennant noticed something horrifying happening to his herd. His cows were wasting away, developing lesions, blackened teeth, and tumors. They became aggressive, charging at him, which was completely uncharacteristic behavior. And out of a herd of roughly 200 cattle, 153 died. Tennant's farm was located immediately downstream, from a landfill used by the DuPont Washington Works plant, and he was convinced the creek running through his property was being poisoned. He videotaped the autopsies of his cows, documenting internal organs that had turned bright green, and he took his tapes to a corporate defense attorney in Cincinnati named Rob Ballot. Ballot was an unlikely hero who had spent his career defending chemical companies, not suing them, but he took the case. What followed was the legal discovery process, where Ballot forced the release of hundreds of thousands of pages of internal documents, and what these documents revealed was startling. The paper trail suggested that the corporations involved knew about the toxicity of C8 decades before Wilbur Tennant's cows died. Internal documents showed that company toxicologists knew C8 caused liver enlargement in rats and rabbits as far back as 1961. By the 1970s, studies confirmed that C8 was accumulating in the blood of factory workers. Then in 1981, 3M, the original supplier, informed DuPont that ingestion of C8 caused birth defects in rats. In response, DuPont tracked the pregnancies of their own employees at the Washington Works plant, and out of 7 pregnant women monitored, 2 gave birth to children with eye and face defects. Despite this internal data, the use of the chemical continued, and the waste continued to be pumped into the Ohio River and dumped into unlined landfills. The document suggested a calculation had been made where the liability risk was weighed against the billion-dollar annual profits of the Teflon brand. The Tennant case was the crack in the dam, but the flood came when the residents of the Mid-Ohio Valley realized it wasn't just the cows, it was them. Through a massive class action settlement, an independent scientific panel called the C8 Science Panel was established, becoming one of the largest epidemiological studies in human history. The findings were definitive. The panel linked C8 exposure to 6 serious human diseases: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and high cholesterol. This wasn't speculation. This was peer-reviewed science on a massive population scale, and real people were suffering. One of the most tragic aspects of this timeline is the concept of the safe limit. For years, internal guidelines set the safe limit for C8 in drinking water at parts per billion. In 2016, the EPA issued a health advisory for PFOA and PFOS at 70 parts per trillion, which is roughly equivalent to 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. We often assume that if a chemical is on the market, it has been proven safe. But the reality revealed by the C8 scandal is the opposite, because under the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976, existing chemicals were effectively grandfathered in. By the time the full scope of the PFOA contamination was public, the industry had agreed to phase it out. But to replace PFOA, they introduced short-chain PFAS chemicals like Gen X, which may carry similar risks. The lawsuit brought by Rob Ballot resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements, but the payout is dwarfed by the permanence of the pollution. The story of Teflon and C8 is not just a history lesson, it is a current event, because the molecules created in the mid-20th century are still floating in the Pacific Ocean. They are still in the soil of West Virginia, and they are still in your blood. If you found this investigation valuable and want to support more deep dives into the dark corners of science and industry, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we have more stories to tell and you won't want to miss them.